forward. Make sure it comes up. There it is. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Very good. Welcome back. Welcome also to all of you watching online. We have more great questions here today. Let me start with online questions, and we'll take some questions from our local students. First question comes from Deepak, who lives in Virginia, who has a question about free will. How can we reconcile the free will paradox? It is a paradox, where scientific determinism suggests that all events, including human actions, are predetermined, in a view that surprisingly aligns with certain religious doctrines of divine control with our everyday experience of making choices that feel free and personally meaningful. I think Deepak has not quite represented the scientific perspective properly here. Scientific determinism that says that all human actions are predetermined. And then he suggests that aligns perhaps with doctrine of karma or other religious doctrines of fate. Does science say actions are predetermined? That's what Deepak says here. The question is wonderful, but I think that's not correct. Science doesn't say that actions, everything is predetermined. Science admits there's such a thing as randomness in the universe. And the moment you introduce randomness, what happens to determinism? Gone. So determinism and randomness cannot both be part of science. What science does say, and we completely agree, and I think this is really Deepak's point anyway, is that decisions are made mechanically. There's no free will. You have no free will. The way scientific determinism is usually expressed is like this. Your brain has billions of neurons. They're all doing all of their fancy stuff. And the result of all that stuff is action. You don't decide to do the actions. You feel like you're deciding to do the action. You have the sense of feeling to do the action, but really speaking, it's your brain. By the way, there's an interesting experiment that they've conducted to support their scientific convention, scientific statement that you do not choose your actions, you only feel like you choose. And this experiment has been done and repeated several times, where they measure certain impulses in your brain in such a way that they can figure out when your brain has switched from this path to that path, meaning that a decision has been made. But then they compare that point in time when your brain has made that switch. They compare it to the time when you recognize, when you say, I just decided. And they find there's a gap. Your brain comes to a certain point first, and only later do you get the sense, oh, let me do this instead. They can actually, they have a fancy experiment. It's not complicated, but it's very clever. A clever experiment that actually demonstrates a gap between the brain changing from A to B and your experience of having decided on B. So that's a measurable gap. It's hundreds of milliseconds, but it's still a gap. So anyway, I completely agree with Deepak. How can we reconcile the free will paradox? Because the scientific experiment I just mentioned can be deconstructed. And you can show how it could be wrong. I don't recall the details of the experiment, and also I don't think we want to go into that level of detail. But any scientific evidence that claims to show that your brain makes all the decisions and there's no such thing as free will, all of those experiments are subject to being criticized. In other words, none of them are 100% conclusive. That's often the case in experiment. They call it experimental evidence, after all. So evidence that seems to support the fact that your brain makes decisions. Also, it goes against, no, let me set that aside. On the other hand, your experience 100% says that you experience having free will. That's experience. And how do we reconcile the scientific claim to the fact that your brain makes decisions? How do we reconcile that with your experience of making decisions? I've dealt with this. I've struggled with this since for decades. And long ago, I came to the conclusion that they're irreconcilable. You can't reconcile. Experience is one thing, reality is another. Experience means you see the sun go down. And science says the sun don't go down, the earth turns. These are completely different perspectives, science and experience, and who said they can be reconciled? And I would take it a step further and say, who says they should be reconciled? So what I would say, a couple of things we can say. You all already know that I strongly embrace a scientific standpoint. And I have no doubt that at some point in the future, science will be able to trace the function of every neuron in your brain and show how a decision arises. They can't do that now, but at some point in the future, they will do that. They will demonstrate how the neurons in your brain culminate in a certain decision, apparently proving what they call scientific determinism, the term that Deepak uses. But that doesn't mean, does it mean your experience is invalid? Experience is what it is. Experience is neither true, we could say, experience is neither true nor false. Your interpretation of an experience could be correct or incorrect, but experience as such is neither correct nor incorrect. When you eat a carrot, is the taste of the carrot the correct taste or an incorrect taste? You get my point. There's no such thing as correct or incorrect. You experience free will. Like your experience of the carrot, can you say it's a correct experience or an incorrect? You can't say. If you interpret it, you might interpret that experience wrong. If you say, inside of me, here's a good incorrect interpretation. My consciousness decided this. And those of you who have studied enough Vedanta, you know, consciousness doesn't decide anything. Consciousness doesn't do anything. But if that's your conclusion, if that's your interpretation, you have indeed made a wrong interpretation about your decision making. According to Vedanta, decision making is well, it's all according to doctrine of karma. To make a decision is a karma or not. Manasa karma, right? What determines karma? Two factors. One is will, and the other is conditioning, purva karma. What we call conditioning today, all the experiences a psychologist would say, all the experiences you've had up to the present moment condition your experience. That's an excellent explanation. I don't think the psychologist would say determines your decision, because most psychologists acknowledge free will. Not all, but most psychologists would admit to free will. So the psychologist wouldn't say all your prior experiences determine what you'll decide. They would say, however, that all your prior experiences condition. They create circumstances which lead you to a certain decision, but you still make the decision. A neuroscientist might deny free will. A psychologist, most of them, I think, would probably accept free will. How to explain that in Vedantic language? Well, all those prior experiences are due to your purva karma, plus free will in the present moment. It ends up being the same explanation, the same as what a psychologist would explain. Conditioning plus willful decision, Vedanta would say yes. Karma plus present karma, the mental act of deciding. So this is another way of interpreting your experience, determining your use of free will. But here's the ultimate perspective. Here's a lower perspective and the ultimate perspective. First of all, lower perspective, if you happen to adhere to the doctrine of free will, please understand that the entire doctrine of free will depends. I think I'm a little tired, and we may make this satsang shorter. We'll see. If you adhere to the doctrine of karma, I said doctrine of free will, right? Psst, go figure. So if you adhere to the doctrine of karma, the entire doctrine of karma is based on free will. If you want to throw out free will, you're welcome to, and I'll honor your position. But you also throw out the whole doctrine of karma simultaneously. A doctrine of karma, which is, what is it? There's 1.2 billion Hindus in the world, plus a lot of non-Hindus who accept the doctrine of karma. You'd be surprised how many Christians in one way or the other, and Jews, accept the doctrine of karma in one way or the other. Muslims maybe not so much, but Jews and Christians, many. Maybe I just guess at a number, maybe a third of Christians and Jews might accept the doctrine of karma in some way or another. That means that almost half of mankind accepts the doctrine of karma. My point is, maybe you shouldn't be so quick to throw it away. I'm not saying that's a proof. It's not a proof. It's unprovable, as we've discussed many times. Anyway, I've been giving you a lot of perspectives on this, on what I consider to be irreconcilable positions, scientific position and your experiential position. But we're here to study Vedanta. This question is a Vedantic question or a philosophical question. Does free will exist? According to science, it doesn't. That's not a Vedantic question, right? Vedanta deals with the truth of who you are, Satchidananda Atma. By the way, does Satchidananda Atma have karma? Does Satchidananda Atma have neurons? So you see that very perspective is foreign to Vedanta, but foreign to Vedanta for a more important reason. As you've heard me say many times, Vedanta is not a philosophy, it's a solution to the problem of suffering. You've heard that many times from me. Solution to the problem of suffering. Suffering is a matter of experience. So what I would say finally is this. The scientific perspective here is irrelevant if our goal is to solve the problem of suffering. Can I say that again? The scientific perspective is irrelevant. It's philosophical. Trying to resolve the two philosophically. It doesn't make any difference. If we're trying to solve the problem of suffering, suffering is a matter of experience. Free will is a matter of experience. So Vedanta addresses us philosophically. Science addresses us as the activities of our neurons. I'm not saying one is right and one is wrong. They're both right. But addressing us at the level of neurons is probably not going to solve the problem of suffering, which is an experience. Anyway, I've gone on way too long, but it is such a complicated thing. And I'm just hinting at the complexity in my comments right now. So good question from Deepak. This is from Prashanto in Bangladesh. I need to introduce this first. Prashanto has regularly sends questions, and they're often very insightful, very good questions that he asks. He's also, I think, the only person that we've gotten questions from Bangladesh. And Bangladesh, by the way, if you study the history of Bangladesh, it is sad. It really, really sad. Leading up to the partition of India, and what led up to the partition, and then the problem with Islamabad trying to control Bangladesh leading up to the war, 1973, if I remember right, 71. And the horrible things that led up to the war, and the refugee crisis, and then you have hurricanes and floods, as if all of this political stuff isn't bad enough. And it's already, the village, Bangladesh, is a very poor place and very difficult to live there. Anyway, Prashanto is the only, we get these emails from Prashanto. And in our last class, I mentioned this. Many of you know there's been I think half a year ago or a year ago, there was a change in the government of Bangladesh. And it perhaps has some benefits. The claim is the prior government was very corrupt. I have no idea if that's true or not. But there are two sides to every coin. And the downside is that today Hindus, Christians, and non-Muslims are much more subject to discrimination in Bangladesh following this change of government. Whether or not the change has made the government less corrupt or not, I have no idea. But whether or not the change has increased the discrimination that Hindus feel, that's a known fact. We're quite sure about that. And I mentioned that in the prior class. We had a question from Prashanto. I don't recall what it was. And I said something, I feel bad for Prashanto and all the Hindus living in Bangladesh. It's a hard time. And sometimes I'm a little bit, I feel like I'm walking on eggshells when I make political comments. Because whenever you make a political comment, you have people who say, yes! Or in Bangladesh, yes! Sorry, bad joke. But you'll have an equal number of people saying no and vehemently saying no. This is the nature of politics, and we all understand that. And I have certainly made my share of blunders in these satsangs, making these political references, and I've pushed some buttons, and if I have pushed any of your buttons, I apologize. I don't mean to, but it happens. But here is Prashanto's reply. I have no question today, but I have a comment. I would like to thank you and appreciate you for your concern about Hindus in Bangladesh. Paradoxically, I used to be very much worried about my safety and security in the past, but after being exposed to all this Vedantic wisdom, I'm hardly concerned about it. I've learnt to accept things as they are, and the whole credit goes to you and your teaching about Vedanta. Now I realize that as long as I live in a society with radicalism at its core, hardly anything will change, and I find peace and tranquility in my heart like calmness beneath the rough ocean. That's lovely. So with the help of these teachings, Prashanto has learned that, and I love his metaphor of the rough ocean. So in the ocean, all the waves are crashing up and down, and politics in Bangladesh definitely crashing up and down. These teachings appear to give Prashanto the ability to get out of. Long ago I used this metaphor. There's all of this tumult at the surface of the ocean. You go down just a couple of meters. Perfectly calm. That's amazing. It could be a raging storm up there. You come down just a couple of meters. Perfectly calm. These teachings of Vedanta are meant to do that. Notice the waves are still crashing. Vedanta doesn't solve the problems of the world. People are still suffering in Bangladesh, in Gaza, in Ukraine, in Sudan, in so many places people are, and now we have a new problem in Kashmir. So one more place people are suffering. Unfortunately, spiritual wisdom cannot solve. Human beings aren't doing very well at solving those problems. So to imagine that these teachings are going to somehow magically solve all these problems is perhaps naive. But Prashanto has discovered something about these teachings, and they give you a different perspective. And he very nicely said the perspective is like that of the calmness beneath the rough ocean. And I'm so happy to hear that. It really shows how these teachings help. And just a comment here, not relating so much to what Prashanto was saying, but a comment about Vedanta in general. At some point or another, I think many of you have gotten a question from a friend or relative. Why are you studying all this stuff? This Advaita Vedanta, non-dual truths, non-dual teachings, and it's all so complicated, it's all so abstract. What do you get out of it? And here's a common misunderstanding, both especially for others, but even for students of Vedanta. If you think that the entire benefit is getting enlightened, of course, that is without question the goal, and when you're enlightened, you maintain that perspective of calmness underneath the sea. So perhaps Prashanto, when he reflects on these teachings of Vedanta, he feels that calmness, but when he is outside on the street, he may not feel that calmness as much. That would be pretty ordinary. But an enlightened Prashanto would be okay under any circumstances whatsoever. So the goal is enlightenment, but what I'd like to point out is in the meanwhile, I think there are tremendous benefits you find as you gain this Vedantic wisdom, and it begins to change the way you think about yourself, the way you think about the society in which you live, the way you think about every aspect of life, begins to undergo changes in ways that make you more calm, to use Prashanto's word. It reduces anxiety and confusion and stress. I certainly felt that tremendously as a student. The more I traveled this path, the more I felt blessed by it. So gradual thing. So let us not make the mistake of assuming that the sole benefit of Vedanta is enlightenment. In the meanwhile, there is certainly a progression in which you gradually gain peace and contentment. Another question here from Krishna, who lives in Boston. My question today is regarding the witness-observer state, which we call sakshi bhava. And Krishna uses that term, sakshi bhava. During advanced meditation practices, we can use that sakshi bhava technique. When one controls the mind sufficiently to witness the thoughts, images, and emotions as they come and go, and achieve a state of stillness, isn't that still a state of mind where the mind observes the quiet mind? That's a complicated statement with lots of issues. So let's try to deconstruct it. In sakshi bhava, which is taking the perspective of being a passive observer of the activities of your mind. That's properly understood. To be a witness, sakshi witness, to be a witness means you're not involved, right? I like the fact that sakshi is used in Hindi in the sense of somebody who observes a crime. So in Vedanta, we wouldn't use it quite in that sense. But suppose you're in an Indian courtroom and you're called to the witness stand as sakshi. That means you didn't participate in the crime. If you participated, you wouldn't be a witness. So be very clear about it. And in Vedanta, it means that in meditation, you are not involved in controlling the mind. You are a passive observer, not involved, uninvolved. Notice Krishna's statement here. He says, when he describes sakshi bhava, when one controls the mind sufficiently. Wait a minute. Is sakshi bhava about controlling the mind? There is one element of control, and that is you have to withdraw your attention from being engaged with your thoughts, and you have to stand back, so to speak, detach yourself. That's a good word. You have to detach yourself from the activities of your mind. Well, you can call that control, definitely. It's a willful act. It takes a measure of control. But he says, when one controls the mind sufficiently to witness thoughts, emotions as they come and go, and achieve a state of stillness. Now, we control the mind in many kinds of meditation to make the mind still. We want to make the thoughts go away, emotions go away, perceptions go away. But that's not sakshi bhava, is it? That's a very typical yogic kind of meditation. Chitta vritti nirodha. That's yoga. So sakshi bhava is not. So Patanjali in his Yoga Sutras never taught the sakshi bhava. It's a different technique entirely. So in sakshi bhava, you are not attempting to make the mind still. You are attempting to detach your mind, to detach yourself sufficiently from the activities of your mind so that you can observe the activities of your mind without being actively engaged with those activities, to passively observe. So this is a second comment. So I'm helping to refine our understanding of sakshi bhava. Krishna says that a state of stillness, I think probably when I teach sakshi bhava, I may occasionally say that sometimes your mind becomes still. As you're observing, sometimes the mind becomes still, sometimes it doesn't. But whether the mind becomes still or not doesn't make any difference in the practice of sakshi bhava. Okay, so then last point here, isn't that still a state of mind? Absolutely. That's why it's called bhava. By definition, bhava is a state of mind. A state of mind in which the mind observes the quiet mind. You don't really say the mind observes, because the mind is a tool. You say you, the conscious being, using the tool called mind, you observe the activities of your thoughts, emotions, and perception. So it's not that mind watches. Mind is very unclear. Mind is a tool, instrument. In fact, a common word for mind is antakarana. Karana literally means tool, instrument. Antakarana, an internal instrument or tool. Metaphorically, like your eyes and other senses are instruments through which you see outwards, your mind is an instrument or tool with which you look inside. But no tool uses itself, which is why you can't say the mind observes the mind. So Krishna has given us a lot to talk about, and he goes on. This question also extends to the state of samadhi. When the known and knower fully dissolve, any recognition of the quiet mind is also a thought. No? He says, nice Hindi grammar. Hey na? Isn't it so? Okay. To be sakshi is not a thought. To be the witness, he correctly said it's a state of mind, but it's not a particular thought. If one thought is watching other thoughts, that's mind watching mind. That's a tool acting on its own. He said it doesn't work like that. So a tool doesn't act on its own. The mind doesn't watch the mind. One thought doesn't watch other thoughts. That's not sakshi bhava at all. But rather, you, the meditator, assume the bhava of being a detached observer. That is properly understood what sakshi bhava is. Okay, we'll take one more question here, and then we'll take some questions in our room here. This is Neil, who writes from Raleigh, North Carolina. Neil says, I remember that you once said your guru's guru was Swami Chinmayananda. Correct. So my guru is Swami Dayananda, and Swami Dayananda's guru was Swami Chinmayananda. Are you therefore part of the Chinmaya Mission? No, I'm not. In fact, I'm not part of anything. I'm not part of any religious organization. you could say I am part of the Dashanami Sannyasa tradition. That is, Shankaracharya established these 10 orders of sannyasa, and one of which was Saraswati. And I have been initiated as a sannyasi in that tradition, but it's not an organization, right? There's no Saraswati organization. Don't tell me about... Swamiji, I heard of the Saraswati Brahman organization. Fine, that's not me. There is such a thing, but that has nothing to do with sannyasis who are initiated into the Saraswati order. So what is my connection to Swami Chinmayananda? Indeed, he is my Parama Guru. If you go out to our Guru altar, you'll find Swami Chinmayananda's picture there for good reasons, as my Parama Guru. Why am I not part of the Chinmaya Mission? Simple reason is because I'm not part of any organization. Not even my Guru doesn't have an organization that I could be a part of. If Arsha Vidya was an organization, I theoretically could be part of it, but there's no Arsha Vidya organization either. It's interesting to note that each ashram that has emerged from Puja Swami Dayananda's teachings, every one of these ashrams are separate, individual organizations of themselves. If I'm associated with any organization, it's our little ashram, but nothing, there's no like overarching organization that keeps us all together. Chinmaya Mission, however, is exactly that. It is an overarching organization. It has many centers and branches, not just in India, but around the world, in this country, in Europe, South Africa, many, many places. So then what is my relationship to Chinmaya Mission? The story is a little complex, but you might find it helpful to know the story. So Puja Swamiji, Swami Dayananda, met Swami Chinmayananda in 1953, ancient history, and became his disciple. Then in 1963, actually, well, maybe, yeah, I think 53 is right. By the way, on these dates, I could be off a little bit, but mostly they're okay. In 1963, Swami Chinmayananda initiated Swami Dayananda as a sannyasi, at which time Swami Dayananda thanked his guru and left for Rishikesh, extracting himself from the Chinmaya Mission at that point. So Swami Dayananda had served for a decade in the Chinmaya Mission. He was, not surprisingly, a very central person in the Chinmaya Mission. And if I remember right, he was the secretary of the mission. He was also the editor of their periodical, the Tyagi periodical. So he was he would, whenever Swami Chinmayananda gave a program, I presume that's Swami Dayananda, who was known as Natarajan in those days, was kind of overseeing all the activities. But in 1963, after his Diksha, Swami Dayananda went to Rishikesh, expressing to his guru his desire to live a contemplative life outside of the mission. Some years later, maybe 5 years later, something like that, Swami Chinmayananda had the first of many heart attacks. And Swami Dayananda was then asked to come back to, their main center was in Mumbai, a suburb called Powai. And Swami Dayananda was requested to leave Rishikesh, and Swami Chinmayananda needed him. The Chinmaya Mission needed him. So he left Rishikesh, he came back, started being involved again in mission activities. He conducted the first 2 training courses conducted by the Chinmaya Mission. He came in 1976, Swami Chinmayananda was unable to come to the US for a lecture tour. Swami Dayananda came in his place, and all of it, so it goes on and on. Then in the early 1980s, Swami Dayananda was in California conducting a 3-year-long training course there. He had conducted 2 in Mumbai. Now he's conducting a course in California. And at that time, there was apparently a problem, misunderstanding, mostly between the board of directors of the Chinmaya Mission and Swami Dayananda. And Swami Dayananda, already he wasn't emotionally committed to the mission. After all, he said he wanted to be independent in 1963. He left, he wanted to be independent. So he had stayed with the mission for those additional years. But when things got very messy in the organization, he decided to leave. So I think in 1981, Swami Dayananda left the Chinmaya Mission and started teaching as an independent teacher. And when I came to be his, that was 81, so I came to him in 86, 85. No, 81. It was 81 itself when I met him for the first time. He was still he was traveling then, so it was still during the course. Anyway, I met him at that time and became his disciple. So I guess for that reason, Swami Dayananda left the Chinmaya Mission for the reasons I just said, and for that reason, since I'm Swami Dayananda's disciple, I'm not part of the Chinmaya Mission. I'm cordial. I know embarrassing to lose a name. The Swami who is currently teaching in the Chinmaya Vrindavan Center in here, what is his name? No, Tejomana is a former head. I've met his. Anyway, the sannyasi who teaches about 15 miles down the road here. We're good friends. I mean, there's cordial relationships, and there's no antipathy between the organizations. And there might have been some antipathy years ago. If you've heard stories around 1981, there was, some people blow things out of proportion and get upset and all of it. It happens. But among the Swamis, there's no problem at all. But a final comment here, and then I'll take any questions here. Final comment is, the Chinmaya Mission has a mission, as it says. And Swami Chinmayananda himself described the mission in this way. It was really brilliant. He was a great man, absolutely a great teacher and a great man, humanitarian, all of that. He said his role and the role of the Chinmaya Mission was to convert Hindus to Hinduism. That's what he said. So, and in modern India, that's a pretty important thing to do, right? Especially, I think in the 70s, when the mission was coming up, India was so rapidly becoming westernized. And so Chinmayananda responded to that. So there is a missionary organization, a missionary agenda. And in all honesty, that doesn't work for Puja Swami Dayananda. He doesn't have that. He never saw himself as a Vedantic missionary. He saw himself as a teacher. A teacher is not a missionary. A missionary is a person who shows up at your door on a Saturday afternoon wearing a suit coat and holding a black book. That's a missionary. A teacher doesn't do that. Do you think a teacher of physics will come to your door with a physics book? I want you to believe in neutrons. I'm making a point. So a teacher has no such agenda. A teacher is one who wants to teach students. And so that's a different perspective, perhaps, than the Chinmaya Mission. Okay, do we have some questions here? Okay, a question over here first. Let's see.
Namaste, Swamiji. Advaita, as a solution to suffering, is about here and now, and not about after death. On the other hand, the doctrine of karma is about what we do now affecting what will happen in the next generation, if we, next life, if we have one.
After death.
So for me, they seem contradictory. Does that mean that if you accept one, you're rejecting the other?
That's a good question. I wouldn't say they're contradictory because one doesn't say the other is wrong. Doctrine of karma doesn't say Advaita is wrong. Advaita doesn't say doctrine of karma is wrong. But they have completely different perspectives. A little bit like Chinmaya Mission and Swami. They're not contradicting each other. They just have different perspectives. So the doctrine of karma, as you correctly said, deals with what happens after you're dead. Full stop. The teachings of Advaita Vedanta, however, there's an important teaching of Advaita Vedanta which is not concerned with what happens after you die. Yes, it's true. According to the doctrine of karma, one who is enlightened doesn't get reborn. But that's really what the doctrine of karma is about. What Vedanta is about is freedom from suffering, which you rightly said is here and now. So instead of saying they're contradictory, could we say that they have different perspectives? Vedanta looks at suffering here and now, whereas the doctrine of karma looks forward at suffering. There's present suffering and there's future suffering, and they both attempt to address that suffering. So not contradictory, but very different perspectives. Okay? Okay. You also had a question? Yeah.
My question is about pain and pleasure. Somewhere I read there is no pain and pleasure, there's only pain. I think
let's stay with our common
thought behind that is
what is our experience? Stay with what we experience, not what you happen to read someplace, because we're dealing with what we experience. We all experience pleasure and pain.
Yeah, I think probably the implication there was, if there is pleasure, once the pleasure is gone, the pain follows. Maybe I'm not sure.
There's a neutral point. Okay. Absolutely. Yeah, this is our common experience. Okay. So also, I'm not exactly sure how. Is there a connection to Advaita Vedanta with your question?
Yeah, I was struggling myself I know suffering is to eliminate pain.
Mm-hmm.
But is there a comparable thing with respect to pleasure?
Okay, that's something we can. So we understand Vedanta's perspective is to reduce suffering. What about pleasure? Vedanta has an agenda to reduce your pleasure too. No. But there's a huge problem with pleasure, which is attachment. I want more. I want it again. I want that pleasure consistently, constantly. That's a huge problem, which is absolutely addressed through these teachings. Right. Okay, one more question here.
So my question is regarding, in the past you talked about neuroplasticity and, so the thing is that suppose I say this is my phone right now, right? And then if I sell it though, I'm right away now going to associate with this being mine anymore, right? It doesn't require nididhyasana, where that this is not my phone, this is not my phone anymore, right? So why does it still require so why isn't it instant for the body to, you might say that.
Okay, I get the question. Okay. So there's the backstory to the question, is that we have some habitual kinds of thinking which take a long, long time to get rid of. For example, this is my body. So when you become enlightened, it may take some time to get rid of this habitual identification with the body. So Vinay's question is, I have a phone. If I sell the phone, if I sell the phone, I don't seem to have the same habitual identification with the phone. If you're enlightened, you may still feel like this is my body. If you sell your phone, you no longer feel like it's my phone because you've been paid for it. What is the difference? How long have you had your physical body? Answer my question. Answer my question, please. How long have you had your physical body?
35 years.
Okay. How long have you had your phone?
2 years.
Okay, and that's all it is.
No, but so like, okay, you can say the same thing. You can see that like, okay, some people have their childhood homes, right? And for 35 years or whatever they've had that, and then they sell it, right?
Right.
So they're not going to say this is my home anymore, right? So
They may feel it's their home.
okay,
They would.
okay.
They would still feel. So there's a difference between cognition and feeling. So even though, yeah, thank you. Even though, so somebody's lived in a home for decades, then they sell the house. Cognitively, they know it's not their home. If they were to walk in the front door, how would they feel? I'm home. Right? So it's very mechanical. And you use the term neuroplasticity, which is correct. And the habits are mechanical events that take place in our brains. And we have to deal with that. And that's why nididhyasana becomes such an important practice in Advaita Vedanta. And it's because we have had this identification with our bodies and minds since we're born, maybe before we're born. Who know, that fetus swimming around inside of inside of mom, that is already a living, especially when it's after 5-6 months, swimming or maybe having a good time, I don't know. But some awareness, and in fact, I think they've actually done scientific experiments. They have. This is one that they've done. I find this one fascinating. A newborn child can recognize the voices of mom and dad. How about that? Because they've been listening all this time. They've recognized those voices. So it's not that your life begins at birth. Not exactly true that your life begins at conception either, because that's just one cell after all. So you're more than a cell, but someplace in between, you gradually become a living being. My point is, coming back to the point, we've had a long time to become deeply enmeshed in this identification with body and mind. It's so deeply enmeshed that it's burnt into the neurons of your mind, neurons of your brain, and it's actually physiological. What we call dehatma bhava. Bhava, the feeling that deha is atma. And by the way, deha includes stula and sukshma, both body and mind. So this feeling that I am, that this body and mind is me, is not it is largely a mental, this dehatma bhava is largely mental, but it is also physiological. And that's what science has told us. That's what neuroplasticity teaches us. Okay, a couple more questions and we'll conclude. This question comes from an anonymous student because it's a little tricky. This anonymous student was raised in a Catholic church, but at 3 years ago left the church and is now following Advaita Vedanta, and I think this person considers himself or herself to be Hindu at this point. This person, this person has a 2-year-old child and a spouse. And this person has, spouse is also, instead of reading this, let me just paraphrase. So, this Catholic converted to Hindu is raising a 2-year-old child with a Catholic wife, and I presume parents on both sides will be Catholic. And there's pressure from parents to get the child baptized in the Catholic Church. That's a big thing for all Christians. Baptism is a really, really big thing. It gives you, it's not fair to make fun of them, but it opens up the door to religious life and going to heaven. The idea is if you are denied, technically, according to most Christians, if you are not baptized, there's no way of going to heaven, according to them. So you can imagine then how important baptism is. So pressure from parents to get the 2-year-old baptized. And the writer of this email says, he says, at first, no. 1, I don't believe in the Catholic Church. 2, I don't want to impose on my child this religion. I want her to be free to choose for herself when she is old enough to understand. Reasonable positions, absolutely reasonable. But now there's a problem. Reasonable for the daughter, what about for the parents? That's a whole other issue. So the parents have expectations. After all, it's their granddaughter. And a Catholic grandparent would absolutely want their grandchildren to be baptized. And this person is feeling that, but I don't believe in the Catholic Church, and I don't want to impose religion on my child. But then, and here I'll read, after 2 years of pressure from parents and thinking about this, I decided to baptize my child in order to keep peace in the family. Absolutely the correct decision. Absolutely the correct decision. Congratulations. My father is 70 years old, strict Catholic. So what benefit from fighting with grandparents, fighting with your parents, and what harm to the 2-year-old? So absolutely the right decision. And that shows a good example, of not being rigid. This is an important topic. Give me just a minute or two, and this maybe we'll take just one or two more questions after this. Well, there are quite a few left. But this, I think, is important enough to talk about. This rigidity. So the author of this email, very excellent, not rigid. Let me make a point about not being rigid. Some more orthodox Hindus feel we have to hold on to our religion, hold on to this, hold on to that. We should be strong. And anyway, let me not get into more political trouble here. But this kind of rigidity can be a problem. And the example I've given, you may have heard me, these people will quote, look how strong Bhishma was in holding on. Those, I won't tell the whole story. Most of you know it in the Mahabharata. He held on to his vows no matter what. He rigidly held on to his vows. And the consequence of holding on to his vows is hundreds of thousands of people got slaughtered. Properly interpreted, he should have let go of his vows, which would have incurred papa karma for him personally, but would have blessed the kingdom. Would have been the right thing to do. The point is that some people will point to that kind of strength and rigidity as a value, as something that has merit. I'd like to suggest it might not be something of value and merit. Okay, a couple more questions before we conclude. Next question from... There's a question from Ian Walker, who's living in Japan now. Ian says, given your emphasis on, Swami Tadatmananda, given your emphasis on rationality, scientific thinking, and you look upon Hindu stories as being more symbolic than historical, you disregard stories of miracles. I don't disregard them. Disregard means you ignore them. I don't ignore the stories. I just say they're not historical. That's all. I interpret the stories as being ahistorical. So how do you reconcile this with your active participation in traditional devotional practices? Like living in an ashram, wearing saffron robes, praying to deities, starting and ending satsangs with prayers. Well, wait a minute. These are all meaningful religious practices that stand on their own, and they stand on their own because of their meaning. Not merely because of historicity. So he says that I view Hindu stories as symbolic, and I disregard stories of miracles. So I make this point that to be overly focused on the historicity of the Hindu tradition, in my opinion, is a huge mistake. Why? Because much of what is called history is not. It's mythology. But more importantly, I argue, and you've heard me make these statements before, that proper religious and spiritual teachings don't depend on being historical. In other words, to say that sannyasa is practiced today because it's been practiced for a couple of thousand years, that's not why I'm a sannyasi. I don't care if it was practiced for 1,000 years or since Tuesday. Sorry. being a little over the top here. But I take this lifestyle for me is because it is inherently valuable. The value of sannyasa doesn't depend on it being 1,000 years old tradition. The value of murti puja doesn't depend on it being 1,000-year-old tradition. The value of all of our prayers the value of a prayer depends on what? Its age? Does that make any sense? The value of a prayer depends on its content and your sincerity. This idea that historicity is important is overemphasized. And can I end that with a really bad joke? If things that are old are better, what about the milk in your refrigerator? Okay. Let me just pick one more question to conclude with here. Gosh, a lot of questions. Okay. Here. There still. By the way, I apologize not getting to all the questions. Maybe I talk too much, but that's part of the purpose of these satsangs is to kind of explore these ideas more thoroughly. A lot of these questions I could answer in a sentence, but that maybe is not very satisfying. Here are some questions, however, that I will answer. Actually, we'll take this question last. This is from Jay, who lives in New York. Jay asks, would it be okay to kill animals for human food since it moves them closer to a human birth? That's an interesting interpretation of the doctrine of karma. And by the way, it's kind of widely held. When I lived in Rishikesh, it was a common joke. So if a mosquito lands on you, and it would usually be someone wearing this dress. Kita Mukti, liberation for the mosquito. According to the doctrine of karma, being born as a mosquito is not so great. So you free the mosquito from that life as a mosquito, hopefully to achieve a better birth next time around, which is a nice. But even in Rishikesh, it's a joke, right? They don't take it serious. In other words, the sannyasi does this and is embarrassed because sannyasi takes a vow of ahimsa. They've just violated their vow of ahimsa, and so the sannyasi now wants to deflect. This is our modern thing. So how to deflect? Kita moksha, kita mukti is the term they use. So it's deflection, and it's not even true, because how can you be sure that the next life is going to be a better one? The argument would go, being a mosquito is pretty low on the ladder, so chances are it's going up. Being a cow or a chicken or a goat is not so low on the ladder. I think cows feel affection for the farmers who take care of them. I don't know about chickens, maybe goats, but cows can, like a dog expresses affection. I think cows have, to some degree, can express affection, so that they're certainly not on the bottom rung. So if you kill a cow for the sake of human consumption with the excuse that this is go mukti, you are freeing the cow from his or her bovine existence so they can travel on to a better life. How do you know they won't go down? The doctrine of karma is not we have no way of knowing. Is it going to be a better birth or not a better birth? We have absolutely no way of determining. The only thing we can determine is when animals are killed, they suffer. That's a fact. We know that, and for that reason, we would not say it's okay to do such a thing. Okay, we will conclude. If more questions next week. Om sarve bhavantu sukhinah, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet, asato ma satgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityorma amritangamaya. Om shanti shanti shanti. Om Tat Sat. See you next week.